Hello everyone and welcome to aidsmapLIVE, the International AIDS Society Conference Special. I'm thrilled to be joined by the most brilliant panel to discuss the most important stories from the conference. There's so much knowledge and expertise in the room. So if you have any questions, do please get them over on Twitter and Facebook. They, fingers crossed, should be sent over to me and I will try to ask our panel. But first of all, let's meet them. First of all, Dr. Laura Waters, HIV and sexual health consultant extraordinaire from Central London, National Speciality Advisor for HIV and founder of People First Charter. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And Laura, how did you get here today?
I came on a Lime bike and I only swore at 2 pedestrians, which was quite remarkable.
Fantastic. Very good indeed. Next, we have Gus Cairns, 66. He's put down.
I'm 67 now.
Oh, that's lying on his bio. Gus was diagnosed with HIV in 1985, started working in the field of AIDS activism in 97 after narrowly surviving himself. Between 98 and 2002, he was the editor of Positive Nation magazine, where I got my first writing opportunity. So thank you, Gus. Been working for NAM aidsmap between 2008 and this year, when you've sort of retired from full-time.
Officially.
Yeah. But still contributes as a freelancer for NAM, EATG, EACS, and loads of other stuff. So Gus, how is the so-called retirement coming along?
This week it's been worse than working because I've been covering, last 2 weeks, covering an Australian conference on Zoom, meaning you're having to sit up at 2 o'clock in the morning to watch sessions. It's been exhausting, frankly. Anyway, I'm going to go and lie on a beach in Barcelona next week. So
fantastic. There you go. You're looking very good. And next, the person that my children actually think that I'm really cool because I know, Adam Castillejo. Adam, also known as the London patient, is the second person in the whole wide world to be cured of HIV through bone marrow transplant. Yep. Adam now devotes his time to energising and motivating scientists and the community, and is an ambassador of hope who inspires people all around the world. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you.
And I'd say that you have now met 3 of my 4 children.
Yes.
And
it's a family affair.
It is a family affair. And my mum, who is from Guyana, was really pleased to see you because you've got Guyanese ancestry. Is that right?
I think my family have Dutch ancestry and that from Curacao, so it's kind of like the connection there.
Excellent.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Next, we have Ben Phillips, Director of Communications at UNAIDS since 2022. Is that right? A national of the UK. Ben is the author of How to Fight Inequality. I have got the book in my bag. I've got a bit of a great book, everyone, to get it. And has been Campaigns and Policy Director at Action Aid and Oxfam. So Ben, I know that you are from the UK, but you don't normally live here. Is that right?
I don't normally live here. I live in Geneva and my family is in Italy and my wife is from India. So I'm a bit all over the place, but it's been really lovely to be in England. I've been seeing my mum, been seeing my family here. And I've just been at Crystal Maze, where when winning a crystal, I broke 3 buttons on a shirt. And thankfully, for your viewers, thankfully I had brought a spare shirt in some kind of premonition that something would happen. Therefore, making this a family show still.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you, Ben. And finally, we have Mercy Shibemba, MBE. E, member of the British Empire.
Thank you, Susan.
Mercy is an award-winning advocate for people living with HIV, sharing her story of growing up with HIV to educate, challenge and inspire. She works as a youth engagement and participation across clinical trials at Penta, as well as being part of aidsmap's Emerging Voices and as chair of the Social Innovation Partnership. Bloody hell, Mercy. Very impressive stuff indeed. But when do you get to meet, have you met a royal yet to actually get it?
I haven't, but Ian Wright was on the same list. So if we're not going on the same day, I'm not sure I can really participate. So just holding out for that. But
That's royalty.
Yeah. Exactly, that is
real royalty. And as a Crystal Palace supporter, Ian Wright used to play for Crystal Palace and is from Croydon, which is a really cool place, everyone, despite what people say. So yeah, come to Croydon. But anyway, people have been sending questions from all over the world. So let's kick off. Laura, over to you, first of all.
Okay.
One of the really important stories from the conference was another case of somebody being cured of HIV. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so this is now the 6th case of cure. There have been 5 prior to this. And in this pattern of referring to the people as the location patient, obviously Adam, London patient, this is the Geneva patient. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail because it's all quite sciencey, so it's way over my head. But what's happened so far is this small number of people who have had a type of cancer and had a stem cell or bone marrow transplant. And the other 5 cases, the transplant has come from a donor who is naturally resistant to HIV. This is the first case that's been successful where the donor is not naturally resistant to HIV, which most people aren't. So most people who donate bone marrow don't have this change that makes them naturally resistant. So far, the Geneva patient has had no detectable HIV for about 20 months, so approaching 2 years off of treatment. It's still early days, but this, again, shows real promise. I think, without wanting to be pessimistic, there have been many other cases where the same's been tried without success. This itself isn't going to be a realistic way to offer people cure for HIV, but once again, it gives that hope. And we talked about you being, Adam, being an ambassador of hope, that all of the research into cure, there is a point. If this can work, we just need to get the right combination of the right treatments and the right monitoring. But it's another example of hope, but this time without a donor who was resistant to HIV.
Fantastic, thank you. And so, Adam, can you tell us about your experience of being cured?
So my experience to be cured of HIV, is like Laura was saying, is we have a specific, we have a CCFR mutation, which enables us to be cured of HIV, being in remission. And I think this Geneva patient, I think it's different to say, and we like to, as all the cure patients, we like to welcome him into the family. And I know it's a different method, and I think it's early ages, but at the same time, we want to give it a warm welcome from the Sitio Hall patient, the Dusseldorf patient, and myself, the London patient. So we're giving a warm welcome to the family.
Wonderful. And did you ever think that you would be cured?
No, I think when I was diagnosed, I was given a death sentence. I was given like a 10 years maximum to live. And by the 2000s, it was a very different landscape, HIV treatments. When I got the opportunity to have a transplant for eradicate my cancer and the HIV, I never dreamed. It was like a dream. I never thought in my lifetime I will see cure of HIV. When I was given the opportunity to do that, I felt very compelled to help science. The responsibility to science to help our community, because for humankind, because we are 40 million people who have died of HIV in the last 4 decades, and it's still more than 40 years now, 40 million people, still living with HIV. So I think it's a breakthrough, like Laura said, it's not feasible for everybody, but it's the it's a proof of concept. And for me, that is important. That's what I go around the world and tell people, this is a proof of concept. This is the window, that is the door for a feasible cure. It's not feasible for anybody because, as Laura said, it's very complicated and we cannot do that for people. But it's a hope. And that's what I'm the ambassador of hope, to give hope to people. And it's important that to give that hope to millions of people.
That's wonderful, and it really does give hope to so many people and so inspirational. And Gus, obviously you've been living with HIV for like...
I was just counting 38 years, well over more than half my life.
But, I mean, is the prospect of a cure something that's important to you?
Yes, though, I mean, to be frank, I doubt if I'll live long enough to be cured of HIV, although it would be nice. You know, on my deathbed say, oh, by the way, you're HIV negative. Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, I think curing HIV is very difficult because it's a bit like a cure for cancer. They have to kind of fish every HIV-infected cell out of your body, as it were. But there are ways of doing it, we think, because we also have other people who haven't had bone marrow transplants, and they're called elite controllers, and in some cases post-treatment controllers, people who naturally seem to be able to cure themselves, or have had a hot course of treatment, and when you take them off the treatment, their HIV doesn't reappear. They're still like the bone marrow transplant people like there's still, you know, handfuls of them. But we know that if it can happen, we can find ways to make it happen in more people.
Fantastic, wonderful. And I mean, it's brilliant that this research is happening, and you know that people like Adam and other people have been cured and potentially have been cured. But I'm really conscious of the fact that there's still people all around the world who still don't have access to treatment. I mean, at the conference there was a lot of discussion about, you know, like getting to zero. Where are we at now?
We're really not far enough. 3/4 of people living with HIV are on treatment, which means 1/4 aren't. With kids, it's half-half. But when you look at that quarter, I think it's a really important point. This quarter is not random. It's not like, oh, well, we'll just get to the next quarter. That quarter are the people that society excludes. Yeah. That people are, when you say to someone, because you should be ashamed, either because you have HIV or because you belong to a category of people that we've deemed unpeople, whether that's because you're gay or because you're a sex worker or because you're a person who used drugs or because you're a migrant, whatever is the reason. And so to get that last quarter, 2 really important things need to happen. One, we really need to fight stigma, discrimination, persecution. Human rights is healthcare. And homophobia is murder. Homophobia means you refuse to end your country's AIDS deaths because you are sending people away from healthcare because they are more scared. They're more scared of you knowing than they are of dying. So that's the first thing that we need to fight. The second thing, and this is an aspect on tech, we really need to make sure that long-acting medicines get to everyone. Now, long-acting medicines aren't a cure, but for some people, to take pills every day just isn't going to be the way that they are going to be able to keep going. For whatever reason, but some aspect of their life. A woman who doesn't want her husband to know that she has HIV because she fears being beaten up. A gay person that doesn't want their village to know that they have HIV. A person whose life is chaotic, perhaps because they're a migrant or they're insecure. Whatever is the reason. If those people can have long-acting medicines, then that's not just better or nicer, that's the difference between being on treatment and not being on treatment. It's the difference between living and dying. And if we get that long-acting medicine shared, it's being developed now, it's so exciting, but is it going to be a product for the rich and people in rich countries, or is it going to be a product for the world? If we make it a product for the world, then we can be really, really hopeful. So, I mean, the 75% fills me with shame. The 50% of kids, I just think, is an absolute moral outrage. We have to be determined to make sure we get every single person living with HIV on treatment. Absolutely essential.
Absolutely. And Mercy, as a young person who was born with HIV, I mean, was there anything at the conference in terms of children that struck you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the CHAPAS 4 study released their results and, shows options for more formulations for children. And I think so often, we talk about exciting things like a cure, but we forget that treatments for children still lag way behind adult formulations. Sometimes it can even take as long as up to a decade for new innovations to appear in pediatric formulations. And so it was really exciting to see the results of the study show that, okay, there are some exciting other options that could be used instead of current standard of care treatments. But it's absolutely not okay that, half of the world's children living with HIV in 2023 do not have access to medication.
Yeah.
It's absolutely unacceptable. And I think that I sit in too many rooms where it's still just a fact that everybody just says, this is crazy, but it just doesn't change.
We need actions toward
Yeah.
that. So because for me, being in a position to be cured, I think that it's a position of privilege.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand a lot of people don't have access to treatments. People don't even get tested. Some people, we have to look. I'm looking at prevention, treatment, and cure because we have to do that. As you both said, a lot of people don't get treatment. They don't have access to treatment. In the lower and middle income countries, that is non-existent sometimes. And people are afraid to go in medications. It's all the stigma, all the taboo, all the misinformation. So I try to go around the world, kind of start educate and engage the community with the researchers to start understanding that. And I think Africa is one of the most important part because for me, if you cure Africa, you cure the world.
Right.
And I think that is important because I'm passionate to work with that. I work now with a called GGTI initiative. It's a global gene therapy initiative. So we work in Africa, in Uganda, in Tanzania, and in all the African countries, in Senegal, and try to understand people access to treatments, get different way because we always talk about in the rich countries where we get all the privilege, but then it's not existing in other part of the world. And I get a lot of emails, DMs, people asking me for the basics.
Sure.
How can I get treatment in the Philippines, in India, in South America, in Africa, and even in the United States? I get that type of question, and my passion is to work with the community, with the activists, the advocates, to try to help to raise the platform around the world. So I just came out from Holland talking about PrEP, because even in Holland, people don't have access to PrEP. So it's HIV prevention.
Right.
So it's just imagine it's happening here in Europe, imagine around the world. So that's what I have to keep working.
But one thing just to add, without criticising IAS, because it's a fantastic conference, they're an amazing organisation, it is a conference that prioritised coverage of cure. There are lots of sessions on cure, there are lots of sessions on long-acting. I completely agree that access to long-acting treatment needs to be equitable. But a truly amazing session on human rights, and it was about the upcoming launch of the International AIDS Society and the Lancet delegation statement. I'm losing my words, but human rights.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. When was it? It was at 7:30 in the morning alongside 5 other sessions. And, it is difficult to juggle a programme, but I think it's no wonder that everyone's talking about cure, and it is important. It does provide hope. It provides scientific rationale. But for all the reasons we've heard, when there is still punitive legislation, and this human rights talk was absolutely astonishing. And I keep saying to people, no one's voice is too small to stand up and challenge this. And the role that medical organisations and community organisations can play in challenging stigmatising legislation is it's incredible. So I do think that there is the way the conference set up and the way the conference is focused perhaps detracts from some of those core issues.
Another issue that's to do with that is, and this actually came out first at the Beaver conference in Newcastle this spring, is that the complications in people's lives don't stop when you put them on HIV therapy or when they start PrEP. And it is now becoming apparent that one of the other things we have to do is to support people in taking antiretroviral therapy or in taking PrEP, because we're getting situations in some countries where there's more people who have been diagnosed and have started antiretroviral therapy or who have started PrEP and have dropped out than there are people starting it. So you've got to have the support for those people to sort of keep on being able to take things that are going to benefit their lives or stop them catching HIV. And one thing I liked from what I could see at the conference is that there were some good studies of very simple practical things, practical modes of support. There was a great one about starting Zambian sex workers starting PrEP. 97% of them started when they got support from their peers to say, this is a great thing, do it. There's a really simple triage model from Mumbai that stopped people who arrived with really, really low CD4 counts from just dying in the first month, basically, prioritising them. Lots of really kind of simple things. And I absolutely agree, there was a welcome emphasis on some studies of children, including one that said, look, we've got to get better formulations of HIV drugs for kids, especially the key drug at the moment, dolutegravir. And there was another one that mixed children with a cure, which is this fantastic story. It took me a while to disentangle what was going on. They had a bunch of expectant mothers in South Africa. Not all of them, sadly, they were all positive. Not all of them, sadly, didn't pass on HIV to their unborn babies. Some because they only found out they were positive when they were in the late stage of pregnancy, some even during labour. Okay, so some of the babies caught HIV. But some of the babies, a handful, turned into these long-term post-treatment controllers. They came out of the womb with very low viral loads, and they are, and in some cases undetectable, because they're trying to find HIV in them. And you might almost say this was a case of prenatal therapy. They'd sort of and a lot of them came out. That sounds very clinical, but were born with very low viral loads. Especially interestingly, the boys. This was a gendered phenomenon. It's a fascinating study, and we can find out so much more from that. And children should be a focus of HIV science anyway, because they are better candidates for a cure for a start, because of their immature immune systems and things like that, but also because they just need equity when it comes to treatment.
Absolutely, and I'm really conscious, and we have spoken about the inequity between countries, but there's also a significant inequity within countries, particularly in relation to women living with HIV, that we face intersecting forms of stigma, discrimination, disadvantage. And one of the areas that struck me that was considered in the conference was about coercive reproductive, just in terms of medical treatment. And I know for me, when I was pregnant with my son, who is now 18, I did a naked cover of Positive Nation magazine that Gus was the editor for, to show that women with HIV could have children. But a woman soon after got in touch with me and said that her doctor was trying to persuade her to have a termination because she had HIV. And when she read that, she went on and had a baby. But Mercy, what sort of stories struck you from the conference in relation to women?
Yes, so GNP Plus presented their data around a survey that they'd done, and it showed in that I think between 1% to 3% of the survey respondents had talked about their experience of forced sterilisation, and the fact that we're still in a position where people do not have equity when it comes to deciding their rights in terms of whether they choose to be a parent or not is absolutely unacceptable. And I think, you know, across all of the scientific advances that we have, human rights should absolutely be at the heart of it. And it doesn't just harm parents, but, you know, hearing that as someone who's grown up with HIV, I think, yes, okay, I don't want people to be born with HIV. We've got the tools we need to stop that from happening. But actually, I'm still able to live a full and rich life. And it feels like it invalidates my right to exist when it's like, oh, we'd rather be without that. And it's just really concerning that we're still in situations where people are unable to get fair access to reliable, accurate information about things like U equals U, about things like having a baby, and it strips people from being able to make choices about their own life in their own way, and whether that's policies that governments might put in place, whether that's just a cultural thing in terms of how we might talk about healthcare to particular communities, it's got to stop. And I think that, you know, like you said, it's really important that we keep on putting that at the heart of science, because otherwise you can have all these interventions and great tools, but they're never going to make an impact.
Absolutely. And Ben, we were talking earlier about a case of that happening a while ago.
Yeah, but only just accepted as an abuse. So in 2002 in Chile, a woman called Francesca, she did all the right things. She was a person living with HIV. She made sure that her baby was born HIV free. She discovered the day after she'd had the cesarean section, successfully delivered an HIV free baby, the doctors informed her that they'd sterilised her. In order that she wouldn't have another baby. Now we know that women living with HIV can have babies who are HIV free, and we know how to support them in doing so. But the violence of that act, to do it against her will, without even telling her, and that's 2002. It was in 2022 when the government of Chile finally said sorry. A case went to the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. UNAIDS was there as what's called a friend of the court. So we put forward evidence about how this was egregious and how this was so harmful to getting people to access services also. But that it took somebody 20 years just to win a sorry for what the government had done to her body. I think it's another reminder that this issue that we can sometimes medicalize, and it's so important that we get the best medicine, but it's also so important that medical expertise is always on tap, not on top. It's never to suppress people. And we always have to remember that people living with HIV and people at risk of HIV are not a target of intervention. They are the best intervention. They are the best leaders. When you let communities lead, we fix all of these problems. When you de-people people, when you take away their humanity and their freedom, everything goes wrong with their rights, but also everything goes wrong with an HIV response too. So the point that you were making before, Laura, about that, human rights is healthcare. This isn't separate. I love doctors, I love nurses, but the most important people in winning the fight against HIV are people living with HIV and people at risk of it. They are the true heroes. They are the true leaders. When we let them lead, we succeed.
Absolutely. I agree, absolutely. And Laura, I know that you've been doing quite a lot about language around HIV that was covered at the conference.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people for much longer, much more loudly, and from affected communities, much more importantly, have been calling on avoiding stigmatising language for some time. And it was just a chance, really. It was the same conference in 2021, in the middle of COVID. It was in Berlin for very few people. Most of us were at home watching it, depressed on computers. Like you watched Brisbane, actually, Gus.
Yeah.
I counted the abstract. So I think referring to a person or a community as HIV infected is just not a nice term. And this isn't just in HIV. Across medicine, so many people living with long-term conditions or particular characteristics. And the concept of people first or identity first language is nothing new. But there were too many examples, and a tweet turned into me staying up till 2 a.m. on godaddy.com, or I always say other websites, whatever you call them, are available. And you created this charter. It's super simple, and it's not. The one thing it's not set up to do is to tell the community how to describe themselves. That's absolutely not what it's about. It's about sharing the voice of the community with medical journals, conference organisers, etc. So we've had it's brilliant. So lots of societies now, and most recently International AIDS Society, actually for the first conference, who announced they had eliminated the use of HIV-infected personal people from the conference programme, they've been really supportive from the start. They were one of the first endorsers, but when they announced that they'd actually removed that terminology from the whole programme, because you can't, it's a small step really in the grand scheme of things, but if you don't get policies, journals, publications, and medical language right, you can't really get the language right everywhere in the world. So it's a fortuitous creation of the website with a cool logo. I mean, it's a white cert. It's pretty cool. But yes, it's fantastic. But it's all thanks to the community, and we've had community involvement from the start. In fact, Matthew Hodson was one of the sort of founders and helped draft the original version of the guidance. So yeah,
wonderful.
Very proud of it.
Yay, go Matthew. and Gus, I mean, another issue that came up a lot at the conference was around messaging and around messages about U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. And there was recent guidelines from the WHO. What was covered in that?
Right. Well, we need to go into the background of this, because in the background something wonderful is happening. I think this is going to be the conference at which the world says cheap viral load testing should be available for absolutely everybody. That's the background, and this has always been a source of discrimination between people in the rich countries and people in the lower income world. You're in the rich country, you're used to getting a viral load test. You know, are my drugs working? Oh, your viral load's undetectable. Great, I can sort of relax. In lower income countries, that has not been the case. Viral load tests, up till recently, have been expensive. They need to be done on samples of plasma, which go off or need to be refrigerated. So you can't do them miles away from a central clinic. Now we have, or are beginning to have, the technology to do much cheaper viral load tests on what's being called dried blood spots, little bits of blood on a card or similar assays, and that's great. The messaging is that they're a bit less sensitive, so they'll detect if somebody has a viral load down to about 1,000. Beyond that, they may find that you are what's called virally suppressed, but not undetectable. In other words, you're in a bit of a grey zone. Because up till now we've been used to calling virally undetectable people with a viral load of under 200 or under 50 or under 20. It depends what your test does. Okay, and what U equals U was founded on were the partner studies that says somebody with a viral load below 200 cannot transmit HIV. There is zero risk of transmission. Okay. In between, we're not quite sure. It looks like there were a couple of transmissions from people with viral loads of 600, 800, things like that. So WHO had to invent a sort of medium category, a kind of amber category, where you are suppressed, which means that your chance of transmitting HIV is very low, 0 to negligible, but isn't quite 0. I was a little bit worried about this because I think WHO may have jumped the gun a bit on this personally. It is a personal opinion. Because there are now dried blood spot assays appearing that can measure or have a lower limited detection of like 400, 500, things like that. So I think this sort of grey zone will become a thing of the past, and we will be able to say with confidence to anybody, anywhere who has a viral load test, it's working, your drugs are working. And that is the wonderful thing. And the reason it's so wonderful is because people in places like Africa and other low-income settings have had to put up with what's called clinical monitoring, which means basically they wait until they get ill before they change their drugs, or at least CD4 monitoring. And that's no good because people stay on failing therapies far too long and they get resistance. And that's disastrous for planning HIV therapy across the world. So I think in the background to this is a really exciting development.
Fantastic. And someone has asked me about statins. Laura, I know that you were involved in that. What's the latest from the conference about the benefit of statins for people with HIV?
Let's not exaggerate. I wasn't involved in one of the biggest, most landmark trials that we've seen in terms of comorbidity prevention in HIV. I just was happy to be invited to moderate it, so I was
involved in.
Obviously, moderating is hugely important, Susan. I'm
Thank
not
you.
denying it's
Don't
important
just
at all.
moderate.
So, Reprieve is a study. So we know in the general population, and unfortunately, general population studies almost always exclude people living with HIV because they want to study people who are just easier to study. So people who've got complications like HIV or viral hepatitis or many other conditions don't get included. And we know that if you take a statin, the very common drug to lower cholesterol, you reduce your risk of getting things like heart disease. It's called primary prevention. You haven't had a heart attack, you haven't had a stroke, but you're going to reduce your risk of getting one in the future. So, for example, in England right now, anybody who's got a higher risk, and there's a calculator you can do online, and it accounts for things like whether you smoke, your family history, your cholesterol, blood pressure, various things, it comes up with an estimated risk. And if your risk is above a certain threshold, already in England you should be offered a statin. That's routine for everybody. We know people with HIV, excuse me, for a variety of reasons may be at higher risk of things like heart disease, but no study had been designed specifically looking only at people with HIV, and this study's been going on for years. It's a huge achievement. So more than 7,500 people living with HIV who are actually the lower end of the risk spectrum. These aren't people on average who'd have been getting these treatments, certainly in England, and globally these drugs aren't necessarily accessible anyway. They took people, randomised them to this type of statin to lower the cholesterol, or to placebo, to dummy drug. And the study was stopped early when people had, well, we say early, people had been under follow-up for an average of 5 years. And they showed an over 30% reduction in serious cardiovascular events, so heart attacks, strokes, and a couple of other things. And this is a really dramatic reduction. It was particularly promising for women, because women particularly their risk is underestimated by some of these cases, particularly women with HIV. But it also showed that older studies show that the protection, so the reduction in your heart disease risk, kind of matches the reduction in your cholesterol. The two things match quite evenly. But the reduction for people with HIV was more than you'd expect. The cholesterol went down, heart disease went down, but then it went down even further. And this is probably all to do because these drugs also reduce inflammation. And inflammation is another focus of a lot of research in the field of HIV. And the idea that people with undetectable viral loads still might have more inflammation than if they weren't living with HIV. So there's lots of excitement, lots of analyses ongoing, lots of discussion about what guidelines should be doing. Do we rush to putting everyone on a statin? Lots of discussion that actually that's a luxury in many parts of the world. We need to prioritise other things. So I think the next few weeks to months start seeing some national guidance emerging. Whether or not it means everybody with HIV should be on a statin, the lower your risk, then the less benefit it's going to have. And we need to think about the risk of harm and the cost effectiveness and all those other things when you introduce any new treatment. But what it definitely means is if you're living with HIV and you've been advised to go on a statin, please go on a statin, because the benefit is even greater than perhaps we realise. It's a discussion, it's a choice always, but statins get a lot of bad press, which is largely very unfair. And then we'll wait and see what the guidelines show.
Wonderful. Was there any negatives in relation to people?
Yeah, so it's very well known that this type of drug increases your risk of diabetes. So you might think, well, what's the point of that? Lower risk of heart disease, but I'm going to get diabetes, and that's bad for my heart. That's very well established. People much cleverer than me have worked out that the benefit is far, far, far outweighs that risk of diabetes. And it sounds like most people who develop diabetes, it's probably just that they may be getting it sooner than they would have done otherwise. These are all people with well-known risk factors for diabetes. And the particular statin they studied might be one that's associated with a lower risk. They also showed that for people with diabetes, they still saw a major reduction in their risk of heart disease. So it's a well-known thing. The other thing that people always talk about is muscle aches and pains. The difference was minimal, actually. Right. So people on the dummy drug saw almost as much muscle pain as the people who were on the active drug.
Wonderful. And talking about diabetes, was there anything from the conference in terms of the risk of diabetes from medication?
Yes. Try and be polite and diplomatic. So there's a big. So when you're looking at drug trials, drug A, drug B, and you follow up a fairly small number of people for a fairly short period of time, you're not going to find differences in things like diabetes. It's not particularly common on an annual basis. So what you have to do is look at these things called cohorts, big collections of data in huge numbers of people, thousands of people, and then you look back and go, okay, well, the people with this characteristic or on this drug got more of that condition than the people without it, therefore that condition must be caused by whatever. So there was a big study looking at whether the family of drugs called integrase inhibitors, we've been talking about dolutegravir during the course of the discussion, that's one of those integrase inhibitors, they're the foundation of first-line treatment across the world. And this study concluded that integrase inhibitors are associated with a higher risk of diabetes than other types of drug. The problem is the same group said the same about heart disease last year, and then another big study showed the opposite and used different methods. There's lots of debate about, are they using the right statistical methods? Are they considering enough? So there's so many other things that drive heart disease: family history, exercise. Are you on a statin? Are you taking aspirin? And it's really hard to control for all those differences. So I must admit, considering they'd made this big announcement about heart disease last year and another big cohort said, hang on, we didn't find that. Why don't you look at your own results with our special statistics and clever tests? I thought that it should have been presented with a bit more humility, because the trouble is the headlines come away And people with HIV on integrase inhibitors will think, oh my goodness, my mum died of complications of diabetes. I know diabetes is a really bad thing. I don't want to take these meds. And actually, you need to be really careful about how you share some of this information. So that's what that study showed. My prediction is that other studies probably won't show the same. And what integrase inhibitors are doing, I think, is because they are probably one of the sort of least toxic drug classes that we've had, is they are freeing people with HIV to experience everything, all the positive things, but all the negative things of living a normal life, which includes heart disease and diabetes. So there was that finding. I certainly wouldn't, and anyone on an integrase inhibitor who's worried by that, speak to your clinic, absolutely, but I wouldn't get too anxious at the moment.
Sure, and I agree. It's really important for people to speak to their clinic because information is one of the most empowering things for people to make an informed decision about what's right for them. And talking about decision making, what do you think, Mercy, in relation to injectable treatment, particularly for women, and injectable PrEP? Do you think that that's a popular option?
Absolutely. I think what all the PrEP studies have shown and the lack of uptake for women in terms of PrEP is that choice. The availability of choice is really the most important thing. And so you already alluded to, a scenario of someone who would like to take an injectable treatment because of their life circumstances. And I think that, as many choices as we can give people, the better, because then they're able to make a choice about how they engage with their healthcare. One of the things I'm, particularly passionate about is thinking about, as we head into more and more effective climate change, thinking about the impact of climate change on people's health, and thinking about how we're going to have more displaced communities. And so for me, actually, injectable treatment for PrEP for women is a really good thing, not just for people experiencing climatic changes, but other circumstances that we know women are more at risk of. And so absolutely, I think it's the way to go. But I still think the whole way in which PrEP has played out in women, or the lack of how it's played out, points again to inequities in how we've dealt with HIV, and that we still haven't learned enough lessons about what works and what doesn't for specific communities.
Absolutely. And Ben, what action is needed now? Because we've been talking about this for years, and so little is being done.
So I would say two things. This choice thing is really, really important. When governments or doctors try to categorize people, when they say, for example, if you want this medicine, come and tell us that you're a sex worker. Many people, don't want to do that because it's hugely stigmatizing, but also there's many young women that would say, I'm not a sex worker, but if the follow-up question is, do you have a series of partners, some of whom help you financially? Yes. So they're an at-risk category, but if you come out with those kind of bald definitions that don't fit the complexity of people's life, then people don't come forward. So we have to get rid of the whole idea that we're pre-selecting people and instead open the doors. But in order to open the doors, you need abundance. And this notion that kind of scarcity connects with value, it doesn't. In medicine, we want to get rid of scarcity, we want abundance. So it's completely crazy to limit the number of medicines, because we're healthy on a population level. That Ubuntu principle that I am because you are, it's literally true with healthcare. I'm healthy because you're healthy. So we need to flood the availability of medicines. It's really crazy when we have new medicines that we allow them to become the privilege of the few. And part of the problem is that we wait so late. So companies will, after they have something on the market, we're seeing this now with long-acting PrEP, after something's on the market, after people raise a hue and cry, they say, okay, we will share the tech. We'll share the tech with 90 countries. And we'll do it now, and we'll do it late, and we'll do it through a process. So at the beginning, start at the beginning. When you start to see that something might be working, share. It's really crazy from a public health perspective that we allow the profit motive of a handful of corporations to trounce public health. It just doesn't make any sense. So we can have abundance in terms of access to the fruits of technology. If we have abundance in terms of access to fruits, and then we have a principle of choice, we let people seek access to the health technology that they think works for them, we can fix this. But when we have scarcity, then we're choosing failure. And that just seems such a strange thing to do. It doesn't make sense economically, it doesn't make sense financially, and morally, it's just an abomination.
Absolutely, and I'm really conscious of the inequity in terms of COVID vaccination. I mean, it affected me personally. Both my parents had COVID last year. My mum lived in England. She got COVID, she was hospitalised, but she had gold standard treatment. But my dad, who lived in Jamaica, got COVID 3 weeks later. I think he had maybe one vaccination. But when he was hospitalised, all he got was a bit of oxygen, no treatment, and he died. They were the same
I'm so
age.
sorry. And all the developing countries, what's so frustrating about this, the developing countries said, at the beginning, over 100 developing countries said, we need to share this technology, in that case the COVID medicines. And they were told by the rich world, no, we've got a better idea. There's 8 billion people, but we're going to have a constrained supply. But don't worry, it will be shared fairly. When you have constrained supply, it never goes to poor black women first. That has happened with zero drugs. Zero drugs. So as soon as you say there'll be constrained supply, you're basically saying save the white guys. That's a fact. And so the only alternative to apartheid in medicine is abundance. And we can choose abundance. Scarcity is a choice of a very, very strange economic system that we've chosen that's very, very recent. This idea of intellectual property in medicines that was supposed to have a whole load of get-outs which haven't been properly utilised. If we move to that system, we learn from the COVID crisis. If we learn from what happened with first-line ARVs when Mandela was taken to court by the pharmaceutical companies, the two groups of people took Mandela to court: the apartheid South Africa and the pharmaceutical companies, right? And of a moral equivalence, frankly. But if we learn from those lessons, then what we learn is that we can share the meds, we share the tech. It's good for everybody. It's not even being kind. It's so risky for me for other people to be unhealthy. It's so sensibly selfish of me to want to share the meds and share the tech. And it's so doable.
But I think, again, this comes back down to what we were discussing earlier, doesn't it? That we can have all the medicines we want and the community engagement, all kind of everything, but it comes down to the most important thing, and the most important change, the biggest single change that can be made, is political and legal. Because what you're describing is a legal system which is put into place by governments who have got ulterior motives, who are overly influenced by those profit-making companies. And this is the thing, and it all comes back down to the laws around human rights, the laws around access to medication, the laws around patent protection, all of that. That's what's got to change, and I'm not saying all the other stuff is critical and important to do the best of what we have, but we're never going to reach zero unless politics.
I think PrEP is a really important example of this because the contrast is so extreme in the case of PrEP between what we've got and what we could have. And I think this was the conference where we really sobered up a bit about the potential of the injectables, simply because we are there and their affordability is up there. There were a couple of really good presentations. Now, Sheena McCormack, chair of Proud, says I'm better at cost-effectiveness studies than she is, but even I was baffled. But anyway, I tried to make the best of it. From South Africa and Brazil. The problem, if it's a problem at all, with injectable PrEP, is that oral PrEP now is actually pretty cheap. It's like 30 quid a year, right? What does injectable cabotegravir cost? At the moment in the USA, it costs 20,000 a year. In the UK, 10,000 a year. The deal that you were talking about for the 5 generic companies to make PrEP for 90 countries, for a start, it won't come online until about 2025, and then they're talking about a price of 250 a year. That's still 5 times more than what it needs to cost. And countries like Brazil, which are high middle income middle-income countries aren't going to get it on that basis anyway. So I think we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to PrEP. And the other thing about the cost of PrEP is that it does mean that doctors gatekeep and ration it and ask people intrusive questions like that. There's a wonderful quote I always use from the principal investigator of the first study that showed PrEP worked, IPREX, the wonderful Bob Grant. And he said the indication for PrEP is that the person asks for it.
Yes.
Meaning that once you get people clued up enough about
Yes.
what PrEP is and its potential, and they realise that, yes, I want that because I think I might be at risk of HIV, then don't refuse it.
Yes.
It's about trust, it's about trust, it's about education, because accessibility, but people need to trust to go into PrEP, and people not educated to go into PrEP. You know, like you said about Brazil, that means 2 more years. You know how many people will get HIV diagnosis in 2 years? People who are actively want to have PrEP to avoid to get into risking their risk of HIV, and they get HIV. So the situation of PrEP is still the same. But in other countries, is some people don't have access to even testing to know if they're HIV.
Absolutely.
So I imagine that it's just
Yeah, but I think take and I completely agree, and I'm very much one for if you ask to have PrEP, have it. You know, women get the contraceptive pill without being grilled about what their actual chance of getting pregnant is. But you can't ask about PrEP if you don't know about it. And that's where we're letting down communities like women and younger people, is they don't know about it. And if they do, they don't know where to even start asking.
Absolutely. We've only got 5 more minutes. We've got some questions coming in from the audience. So very quick answers, please.
Yes.
From Angelina Namiba. Hi, Angelina.
Hello, Angelina.
For the laywoman, what is inflammation, Laura?
Oh,
Really quickly.
Inflammation is it's oh goodness, it's a bit like when you cut yourself and your skin goes a bit red and it's a bit sore. It's a bit like that equivalent in the body. So it's oh my God, there's a worse explanation of inflammation. It's Gus, help me. It's
Medical school. I'm married to a doctor, don't worry, and that's why I know this. Dolor, calor, rubor. That means if something's red, painful, and swollen, it's inflamed.
oh, now my train of thought's gone somewhere entirely different.
In other words, your body. Don't be rude.
It means that your body's not calm. Your body's
your body is
irritated.
reacting to an injury or an infection,
Okay.
and it's doing all that stuff to get rid of the infection.
Okay, and also, really quick answer. Was there any update on a vaccine against HIV?
In a nutshell, no.
Okay.
In terms of what's going to change anything, no. Small print stuff, yes.
Yeah, early stuff, yes.
Okay, fantastic. And
Just writing
but
all
people,
that.
yes, someone saying that they can't get statins in Leicester, asking their doctor for it. What would you recommend if someone can't get statins? Someone living with HIV.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to ask your doctor what is your current estimated risk of heart disease, and if it's above 10% or close to 10%, you should be on a statin. If you're asking and you're at lower risk, you're not going to come to harm in the next few weeks to months, and be patient, but ask them what your estimated heart disease risk is, and if it's above 10%, say national guidance say I should be on a statin. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. And also, really quick answer, Gus, homophobic laws, what was discussed about the impact at the conference?
Oh, right, yes. I mean, I didn't write that one. Of course, as people may know, that it's the enactment of this terrifically homophobic law in Uganda, which has always been very homophobic, unfortunately, as a lot of other places are in the world. And really, I mean, I think the predictable thing happened. A lot of people were frightened off from attending their HIV clinics. From what I remember of reading the piece, they've started trickling back, and clinics are finding their way around this to safeguard the identity of people who turn up. But you're talking about people who need to be sort of, disguised. It's dreadful. It's just an extreme example of the kind of stigma that people with HIV face every day.
And that was really well covered in that human rights session. And the evidence is, if you apply punitive policies to sex work, to drug use, and to sexuality, everything is worse.
Yes.
End of.
like in myself, I couldn't go. I was planning to go to Uganda, to Kampala, to talk about HIV education, and with the law came, I had to pull out of the trip, and it's really disappointed because I cannot go there. It's awful, but hopefully in the future I will be able to go.
And what's UNAIDS calling for in relation to these homophobic laws? Really quickly.
We're calling for it to be scrapped. We're calling for homophobic laws to be scrapped everywhere. Last year, we actually saw more countries remove criminalisation of being gay than had ever happened in any single year. And this year, we saw the Cook Islands already. We think that Sri Lanka might also move to decriminalise. It's actually the tide of history is going the other way. So we're seeing, you know, some very aggressive language, some real like spikes of homophobia, but the tide of history is pushing against that. Most people stand for acceptance. Most people stand for love, not hate. So I'm confident, I'm optimistic that those of us that stand for acceptance, which, like I said, human rights is good public health, will win.
Wonderful. And we've only got like 1 more minute. So quick fire question. Going round, starting with you, Mercy, what was the highlight of the conference for you?
I think for me the highlight was just being able to see everybody again, and yeah, key critical developments that will actually make a difference in the lives of people living with HIV.
Ben.
That when you add all of it up, this is a choice. It's a political and financial choice. But how exciting that this pandemic, the world's deadliest, that still keeps people in grips of fear, is completely solvable. That's so exciting, and it has to drive us to action.
So I hope to be, and hopefully I will be in the 2024 IAS conference next year. So bring to the table about HIV prevention, cure and treatment, and talk about, we need to change the narrative. Hate for HIV and love for cancer is a human disease. We need to get over that. It needs to change.
Wonderful. Gus?
Quick word for my trans brothers and sisters who haven't been mentioned, but they're at the absolute sharp end of homophobia or queerphobia or whatever you call it. And there was another study from Thailand which showed if you get clinics run by the people that they are aimed at, then people come and do much better. And a quick plug for the European HIV conference in Warsaw. Right place, right time. It will all be about wartime, disruption, migrants, all the people that need the best services in Europe, so come.
I mean, I think being very medical, the Reprieve study, I think, was astonishing, because if you want to address questions in people with HIV, you should study people with HIV. But for me, the highlight is looking forward to this human rights report at the end of this year, because December is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and to see IAS and the Lancet producing this report and focusing on human rights is something that I'm really looking forward to, as well as the European conference.
I hope to be in the 2024 IAS conference, so to change, make a difference. I think it's important to be with the patient, to be part of it.
Wonderful. And oh my goodness, we are out of time. Thank you all.
Thank you. What a
so
wonderful group
much.
of people.
What
What a wonderful group of people.
You're all brilliant. Thank you to the lovely disruptive team. You guys are awesome. See you soon, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.